I've been brainstorming alternate titles for this episode, and I think I've got it. Let me run this by you. Thoughts? This is a review of the Star Trek Voyager episode Q2. If you have not seen this episode and you don't want to know what happens in it, be warned, spoilers beyond this point. The episode begins with a bizarre scene from a Star Trek convention where this dude in a half-assed Borg original character cosplay is droning on and on about some Captain Kirk stuff and boring Kate Mulgrew to tears. And, oh, shit, hang on. This is season 7 and that's Icheb. Sorry, got confused for a second there. Icheb is delivering a book report or whatever and Captain Janeway cuts him off like, fine, you pass, just stop talking. And he leaves and someone else pops in with a familiar flash of light, but it's not Q. It's Q's son. Q. So Q's son is usually referred to as Q Jr., but I'm going to refer to him as Qnier for the remainder of this review because that's a decision I've made, and I hope you can all come to peace with that. Qnier is the little baby we saw at the end of The Q and the Gray, but that was all the way back in season 3. He's all grown up now. Sort of. And as his father explains, Qnier is taking a vacation from the Q Continuum, and he's going to spend it here on Voyager with his godmother, Captain Janeway, or as Qnier calls her, Aunt Kathy. Q vanishes before Janeway can make much of a protest, and within a few minutes, Qnier has gotten bored. Kids today, you think it's boring being on Voyager for a few minutes? You should try watching it for 7 years. Anyway, to alleviate the boredom, Qnier pops down to engineering and turns it into an interstellar nightclub. Janeway orders him to put everything back the way it was, but Qnier's like, nah, and zaps Janeway and the other officers out into the hallway. Tuvok suggests just ignoring Qnier's antics, reasoning that if they deny him the reaction he's clearly trying to provoke, he'll eventually tire himself out and settle down. Ah yes, rope-a-dope parenting. That always works. Qnier visits 7 of 9 in her cargo bay and makes her clothes disappear. 7 totally no-sells it. She's like, you think this bothers me? I work for Rick Berman. As Qnier's reign of terror continues, he reprograms the replicator to dispense sass instead of coffee. Neelix suggests to Captain Janeway that he become Qnier's mentor. I'm good with children, Neelix says. I even used to date one. Neelix's mentorship of Qnier lasts for one scene and ends with Neelix's mouth being removed. Then Qnier decides to make things interesting, and we all know the producers of late-run Voyager only have one move when they want to make things interesting. Bring in the Borg! But Q shows up, chastises Qnier for his antics, and fixes everything he changed. No more Borg attack, Neelix has his mouth back, coffee once again flows from the replicator like water from the holy well of Malvern with nary a hint of impertinence. So we're good, right? Q says to Janeway, we're good? Hey, since we're good, can you do me a favor and fix my kid? It seems Qnier has been having a difficult adolescence. Starting interplanetary wars, disrupting evolution, boring a hole through Pluto to make it a bong. He hasn't been showering, typical teenage stuff. But the rest of the Q Continuum is losing patience and have demanded that Q straighten his kid out. Janeway suggests that Q tries spending time with his son, but that doesn't work out so well. Q leaves, only to return a few minutes later, while Janeway is taking a bath, to announce that now things are even worse, and Qnier is embarrassed to be seen with him, and it's all Janeway's fault. Janeway's like, have you tried forcing him to face consequences for his actions? And Q goes, no, but let me try that. So, he turns Qnier into an amoeba for a little while, then snaps him out of it and informs him that his Q powers have been temporarily removed, and he's got 1 week to get his act together, or else he'll be turned into an amoeba permanently. Then Q's like, thanks for handling my light work, Kathy, and fucks off, leaving Qnier there. Not wanting this unlikable imp who has apparently been the cause of untold chaos and destruction throughout the universe to be turned into a harmless, single-celled organism, Janeway devises a training schedule for Qnier designed to instill discipline and build character. He works with 7 and Icheb in the astrometrics lab. He plays through a holodeck simulation of a difficult diplomatic negotiation. He works in the kitchen with Neelix. He's not happy, but he seems to be doing okay. Then he cons Icheb into writing a paper for him, and Janeway's like, "Nope, you cheated. I gave you a chance and you couldn't even make it a couple of days without trying to get away with some shit. Enjoy being an amoeba, kid." Cunyer begs for another chance and Janeway gives it to him and then smiles after he leaves the room like, "Ha ha ha, that was fun. God, I love instilling fear. It's the best part of my job." Janeway's hard-ass act works. Cunyer does finally get his shit together. He even rewrites the paper he had Icheb write for him and delivers it to Janeway and Q. But Q's disinterested and underwhelmed reaction to the paper sends Cunyer spiraling downward again. Convinced he'll never prove himself to his father or the rest of the Continuum and that he has nothing but life as an amoeba to look forward to, Cunyer cons Icheb, poor, gullible Icheb, into helping him steal the Delta Flyer, which he then takes to a distant star system renowned for its attractive females. How do you spell incel with a Q? Cunyer trespasses in this alien guy's territory and gets in a fight with the alien guy's ship, resulting in Icheb getting injured. So Cunyer bites the bullet and returns to Voyager, but Icheb has been affected by some kind of weird radiation, and the doctor can't treat him until he knows more about the alien weapon that caused the injury. So Cunyer and Janeway take the Delta Flyer back to that other star system and find the alien ship again, and Cunyer apologizes for violating his territory and shooting at him and all of that. And the alien guy says, "Apology accepted. I'll give you the info you need to treat your friend, but since Captain Janeway is responsible for you, I'm gonna punish her for what you did." "But that's not fair," Cunyer says. "Captain Janeway didn't fire on your ship. And she didn't steal no shuttlecraft neither. I did." Alien guy says, "You're willing to accept punishment yourself, but you don't even know what the punishment is. I don't care. It could be torture or execution. I don't care. It could be being forced to listen to a group of TTRPG nerds talk about their favorite dice or whatever. I don't... forced to listen for how long?" But then the alien guy goes all flashy and reveals himself to be Q. "It was me, Cunyer. It was me all along. I was testing you and you passed. Now let's go learn your fate." They return to Voyager to face the verdict of a tribunal of Q juvenile court justices who are all dressed like Q in his post-atomic horror judge getup from Encounter at Farpoint because this is a dopey show for dopes. And the Q judges say, "Okay, we won't turn Cunyer into an amoeba, but he can't be a Q anymore either, so he'll just be a human from now on. Bye." The judges disappear, and Q angrily declares the verdict to be an outrage, and disappears too. Cunyer is disappointed, but he asks Janeway if he can stay on Voyager and continue his training. Janeway appears sympathetic, but then Q comes back and says, "It's all good. I appealed the court's ruling and they changed their minds. You've got your powers back, son. You're a Q again." Cunyer fills Janeway's ready room with flowers as a show of gratitude for her putting up with all of his bullshit, and then vanishes. Once the little ankle biter is gone, Q admits to Janeway that in order to get Cunyer reinstated, Q had to agree to take eternal custody of him. But to show his gratitude to Janeway, Q gives her a pad with a course through space that will cut a few years off of their journey home. Janeway says, "Why not just send us all the way home?" And Q's like, "I offered you that in season 2 and you told me to shove it up my ass. You're lucky I'm helping you at all. Enjoy your flight home. Later." The end. Q2 is definitely an improvement on the previous Q episode, the Q and the Gray, but then that's not saying a whole lot since the Q and the Gray is one of the worst of all Voyager episodes and maybe the worst Q episode. Maybe. I don't know. Hyde and Q is pretty bad. Q2 isn't in that category of awfulness, but it's not what I'd call a good episode either. It does a few things right and a few things wrong, and the focal point of the right things and the wrong things is the character of Cunyer, so let me start with him. First of all, the problem isn't Keegan Delancey. The real-life son of John Delancey, Keegan does fine as Cunyer. His performance is energetic, committed, fully engaged. It's also a bit wobbly and undisciplined and more than a touch amateurish, but that's to be expected. He wasn't an experienced actor. This was only his second time playing a character who even has a name. And after this episode, he left acting, and now he's an officer in the U.S. Foreign Service. Isn't that neat? His performance here is more than fine, and he's obviously giving it his all, and it's neat to see the son of Q played by the real-life son of the guy who plays Q. But as written, Cunyer is a problem. He's the main character of the episode, and the story basically lives or dies based on whether or not I care about what happens to him, and I don't. His character arc feels like standard issue troubled teen fare with a light Star Trek wash added on top. He's a teenager who's been screwing up, and this is his last chance to turn his life around before it's too late. So he keeps screwing up, and he keeps screwing up. Then he starts to do better until he hits a setback, and he screws up again. But then he has an epiphany and finally turns things around for good in the end. The issue isn't that it's by the numbers. Almost every plot, when you break it down to its essential elements, is formulaic in one way or another. The problem is the writing of the episode doesn't do anything to distract from how formulaic it is. It feels rote, and that's the problem. The most interesting thing about Cunyer is his relationship with his father, and we get precious little of that. The best moments in the episode involve Q's reactions to his son, his reflexive ugh when Janeway suggests spending more time with Cunyer, and his nonplussed reaction to Janeway telling him he should have told Cunyer he was proud of him. But I'm not. Q, need I remind you, is funny. John Delancey is funny. When Q is written to be funny, he works. When Q is written to be capricious and dangerous and a bringer of perilous mischief, he works. Instead of that, Q2 gives us Q, the disconnected and disgruntled parent, who is rarely funny and never seems remotely dangerous or mischievous. When Cunyer throws Voyager into the path of a Borg fleet, Q's reaction is to scold his son, "Don't provoke the Borg." My issue with that line isn't that it's inconsistent with Q's past personality, it's that it's the most boring possible reaction he could have had. What is even the point of having characters like Q on the show if they're not going to behave any differently than anyone else? One of the things that has made Q entertaining in the past is his complete detachment from human standards of conduct and morality. He doesn't care about what the right thing to do is. He does whatever he wants. But in this episode, instead of an agent of chaos, Q is mostly an impotent complainer. Cunyer messes something up, Q pops in, fixes it, and whines to Janeway, "What am I going to do with that boy?" It's not funny, it's not interesting, and it gives John Delancey few opportunities to do what he does best as a performer, which leaves him once again, as was also the case in The Q and the Gray, resorting to mugging and clowning, because when the script hasn't given you anything witty to say, you gotta do something, I guess. Cunyer's relationship with Icheb is also underdeveloped. It's supposed to be important. Feeling responsible for Icheb's injury and wanting to help him is what ultimately fuels Cunyer's redemption, but we don't really get to see it. Cunyer and Icheb are only actually together on screen a handful of times. We aren't shown their friendship growing. At a certain point, we're told that they're friends now. Cunyer is suddenly calling him Itchy, and Icheb is calling Cunyer Cue-Ball. It feels forced and shallow, and I don't believe for a second that this omnipotent brat who's apparently spent the last few years traveling the universe, starting wars for fun, is suddenly ready to take responsibility and become a good guy because a friend he made less than a week ago is in trouble. If Cunyer and Icheb actually had scenes together, where I felt like I was watching them become friends, maybe I would have bought it, but they don't, so I didn't. We don't even get a farewell scene between Cunyer and Icheb. The last we see of Icheb, he's lying unconscious in sickbay. Oh, but Cunyer says Icheb is the only friend he's ever had, so I guess that's just as good, right? One of the more fundamental problems with the episode is that there isn't nearly enough time for everything it tries to do. The two elements of the show with the most potential are the relationship between Q and Cunyer and the relationship between Cunyer and Icheb. There probably isn't time within a 44-minute episode to do justice to both of those stories. So the writers of the episode, Robert Doherty from A Story by Kenneth Biller, should have just picked one. Do an episode where Q drops his son off on Voyager and Cunyer makes friends with Icheb and is changed by that. Or do an episode about Q and Cunyer's strained father-son relationship. Q2 tries to do both, plus Cunier's shape up or ship out plot, and it just doesn't work. The episode is broadly similar to TNG's Deja Q, one of the best Q episodes. In both episodes, a Q is stripped of his powers and forced to live on the ship. Deja Q works because Q is sent to the Enterprise as a punishment. He hates it, he feels treated unfairly, he complains about everything, he comments on the inherent absurdity of a former god being forced to exist as a limited mortal, and he undergoes change and character growth in spite of himself as a result of his experiences. In Q2, Cunier doesn't experience growth and change naturally. He's assigned it up front. He's told, become a better person by the end of the week, or else. The situation that results in his change is manufactured in story. Q's story in Deja Q is analogous to someone having a life-changing experience while being lost in the wilderness with no hope of being rescued. Cunier's story in Q2 is more like a juvenile delinquent going through a teen boot camp. It's contrived and limited and not very compelling. Aside from a few moments here and there with John Delancey, one of the strengths of the episode is the direction by LeVar Burton. He doesn't have much to work with story-wise, but he keeps things interesting by finding natural opportunities to move the camera, so this episode doesn't have the peculiar locked-down vibe of the previous Q episode, The Q and the Gray. And he stages the bathtub scene just right, framing Kate Mulgrew in the perfect medium shot so she can get an unexpected but fully earned laugh by acting with her hands in typical Janeway fashion through the bubbles. Q2 is the final appearance of Q until Season 2 of Star Trek Picard, and given how that turned out, it's a shame Q2 wasn't the final appearance of Q, period. Then again, given how the Q and the Gray and Q2 turned out, it's a shame Death Wish wasn't the last time we saw Q. That would have been going out on a high note. Q, like the Borg, is a character with a limited shelf life. His appeal is a lot broader than the Borg, so that shelf life is longer, but it's still not unlimited. He's at his best when he's funny and when he's causing trouble in the margins of the story rather than being the center of attention. With the exception of Deja Q, none of the really good Q episodes are actually about Q. And I don't think that's a coincidence. Q's best use is as a catalyst, an irritant, a foil. I want to see him cracking jokes and lampshading the absurdities of the show and making fun of the characters in ways that are funny and ring true, not bonding with his son. The more we learn about him and his world, the more attachments he forms, the more conventional and less interesting he becomes. And then what's the point? If Q's just going to be another interchangeable recurring character, if he's just going to be another guy on the show, why should I want to see him at all? But this is the sad fate of memorable antagonists from Star Trek TNG. You either die a great villain or live long enough to become a bland also-ran on Voyager. Those are my thoughts on Q2. What do you think of this episode? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would, if you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Please join me again next week as I begin a brand new batch of retro reviews. You know, these last few months, the reviews have been focused on the second generation of Star Trek shows, TNG, Deep Space Nine, a truly distressing amount of Voyager. I kid, Voyager fans, I kid. But that being the case, I wanted to finish this first year of my retro reviews strong by turning back to the first generation of Star Trek, the series that started it all, the original series of Star Trek. So for the next 8 weeks, I'll be reviewing some Star Trek TOS episodes, all united by the theme of other Earths. Parallel Earths, alternate Earths, duplicate Earths. Classic Trek had a lot of those, and we're going to check them out. And we'll start next week with a look at the first time Captain Kirk and the crew of the Enterprise encountered an other Earth, as I review the TOS episode, Miri. See you then. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.